Mark, welcome to the Metal Institute of Thrashology. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
It's great to be here, man. Thank you for having me on such short notice.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, even on short notice, I've went through your catalog and I've probably listened to this album, I don't know how many times since Friday, maybe 10, 12. Really enjoying it. And I want to give special shout outs to C Squared Music. Without them, I wouldn't have even known about the album. And it's just truly been great listen. And I'm sure you're just as excited as me. So why don't you tell me a little bit about it?
Well, this is our fourth record, The Promised Land. Excuse me, The Promised Land with question mark.
Sure, sure.
Um, we uh we have a new drummer for this record, Mr. Brandon White, who's fantastic. And I don't know, other than that, we kind of worked on it the way we usually do. We spent a lot of time working on songs, putting together arrangements. We recorded at Electrical Audio in Chicago, which is a pretty legendary studio here.
Sure.
And we started there, and it just kind of turned out the way it turned out. We're really happy with it. Songs are good, sound quality is good, and the reaction we've gotten in the last week or so since the release has been great. So yeah, we're pretty excited. I'm very happy with how it turned out.
Yeah, and I really thought I thought that the pickup with Brandon on the drums is really like he's a phenomenal drummer. And I thought in the first I'm from the 90s, so I'm not real good with names of songs. Everything's track one to track five. But the first track, the first track off the album, I really thought was a diverse. It really showcased the various different abilities you guys have, and I thought that it was an odd choice, being a longer song, but it really showed not only the great patterns that Brandon could fill, but it showed your guys' level from crunchy, thrashy type music to everything from more progressive Queensryche style music, and it just flowed through the entire album, and it really just a very diverse album. So I'm curious to see like where your influence is and where do you draw this diversity from?
Um, well, speaking just for myself, like like you, I'm also kind of a 90s kid. Um, so there's bits of earlier 90s alternative rock or whatever in there, but I'm sort of on the earlier tail end of that, I guess. So there's a lot of 80s influence in there. You mentioned Queensryche, bands like Fate's Warning come to mind,
So
you
good.
know, older prog metal. I was a big thrash kid. There's a lot of that in the guitar playing, just the way Ryan and I kind of attack the guitars, bands like, Overkill and Testament, obviously Metallica. Um, there's a lot of that. Voivod, it's one of those bands that kind of straddles both lines, very thrash, but also very, very progressive and weird at times.
Yeah.
And we've certainly borrowed from them. Black Sabbath is in there. That's my all-time number one. I mean, everything kind of flows from 70s Black Sabbath, so that's a huge one.
Sure.
I'm trying to think who else. I mean,
I noticed on for just out of what I picked out, the track, I think I was trying to narrow it down today. I was cutting the grass. I must have listened to your album like four times today, and I was trying to pick out the my favorite track on the album. And looking at the liner notes, I thought it was going to be the Tom Draper song "Chasing Eternity." I'm a huge Carcass fan. I'm a huge Spirit Adrift fan. And when I saw Tom Draper's name on that, I was like, oh man, it's going to be phenomenal. But I honestly think that Promised Land is the song that I picked out. And I really like the fact that it starts off with like a Megadeth Trust kind of like bass liney feel. And I thought it was going to lead into this killer thrash song. And it kind of surprised me. And I could kind of hear like elements of Nirvana's heart shaped box in there. And you're
hmm.
thinking like, it's just like these little one note riff, like these couple note riffs. And I'm just, and you're just like, oh man, these are all the songs I liked when I was a kid. And I'm sure, I just, you hear like three notes and you're like, oh, that's the song that I liked when I was six. But it just was such a great song. And like I think because, like we have similar influences and similar likes, that it really just played right into my whole taste. So I can
That's
agree with that.
That's awesome to hear, man. And I'm sorry if I'm like chuckling through this whole interview, but like that's that's a very astute observation there. I mean, I think we pull from a lot of different influences, and I think certain people are just gonna get it. I've been reading reviews from other, websites here and there, and some people I think really get what we're trying to do, or they have an interpretation of what we're trying to do that they really relate to. I think people who are maybe coming from somewhere else with metal, like more extreme music fans, you know, like I read a review the other day that said we were glam rock. I read the review from Tom Draper, and I laughed, but I was like, okay, so these are people who maybe don't quite have the right reference points to dive right in with this record. But yeah, to your point, man, I mean, there's a lot going on in there, and the hope is that anyone listening can find something in there that they like, or takes them back to that feeling of, what I'm always going after is that feeling of hearing awesome music for the first time, that first time you heard Megadeth, let's say, or the first time you heard Black Sabbath, or the first time you heard Spirit Adrift, anything. Um, I love that feeling when you find something new that's just awesome and scratches that itch in your brain.
Yeah.
And, that's a really abstract way to describe your artistic intent, but that's basically what I'm trying to do.
I think the cool thing about it is too, like, and that's why I started this. Like everybody likes telling their best friend, like, "Hey man, you got to check this album out." And so that's why I started this thing. But as much as I love new music, sometimes and like over the last in your album, just the way the timing that it was released and the day it was released. Earlier last week, I just started getting back into like my punk rock roots and like some 90s grunge and like some things that I haven't listened to in maybe, 20 or 30 years. I did a review and it just led me back down memory lane. And so, like, when I was starting to listen to your album on Friday night, and like I said, you hear that little, like, I'm not a Nirvana fan. I just never got into them, never liked them. But I heard that one little note on Promised Land, and I was like, oh man, that sounds like the way you inflected your voice. It sounded like Heart Shaped Box. And I was like, oh man, I'm going to go back and listen to that. And then it takes you down the rabbit hole of, into more influences. And it's really nice that your album scratches, like you said, scratches the itch for new discovery of music, but it can also lead you down memory lane and give you that nostalgic feel too. Really a dynamic listen.
I mean, yeah, and it's cool because it's so open to interpretation. Like, I'm not a huge Nirvana fan either, and if you hadn't mentioned Heart-Shaped Box, I would not have made that connection in a million years. I'm thinking about it now, and it's like, oh yeah, I can kind of hear what he's saying, but I wouldn't have thought of that at all. But if that takes you back to something from any point in your life that you liked, whether it's 30 years ago or 6 years ago, 6 months ago, 6 minutes ago, that's cool.
Yeah.
Um, and and for younger people too, if someone who's 15 hears this record and they go check out In Utero because they've never heard it before, or they check out Fate's Warning, or they check out Voivod or whoever, all these bands that they might have missed out on otherwise, that's cool too.
Sure. And like I have another interview today and I should be listening to their catalog. But as soon as I finish this, I'm putting on Fate's Warning. Like I haven't heard it. And now that you mentioned it, it's that itch. And you're like, man,
You're
I haven't
welcome.
heard Fate's Warning in probably like 3 or 4 years now. I got to go back and hear I can't remember the name of the album I love, but I'm like, man, I got to go hear that like now. So it's really nice that you can fulfill like both ends of the spectrum. But the confusing part of it for me is while you can play and it feels like you could feel to almost everything from like a hard rock or even like an alternative rock sound to even a thrash. You have moments of thrash in the album. Like this could pair well with hundreds of different subgenres of music. I don't know how your album's not huge. Like it's a great sound. It's phenomenal song. It's phenomenal songwriting. And the reason I asked that question is I think Tom had a post when I was like reading up on the album. Tom Draper commented somewhere about he didn't know how you guys were huge. And it had me thinking about it. And the only thing I could think of was like artists like Marty Friedman and George Lynch, guitar virtuosos, those guys are geniuses, and they have the subset and the skill level and the writing abilities to be all over the radio, but they're too talented for radio. Do you ever think that your songs are just too well written for the general population?
I mean, that'd be a pretty egotistical thing to say.
Sure, sure.
I don't know. I don't think about it a lot. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. Everyone in the band has been doing this a long time. And, quality, I think the band's good. That doesn't necessarily equal industry success. I mean, there's a lot of other factors there. Um, and I'm sure you do too, but I know tons of bands that are extremely fucking good that
Yeah,
are unsigned or underground, very much under the radar. There's no link between quality and popularity.
yeah,
Um, my take on it is I think what we're doing, like I was saying earlier, I think there's a certain audience, there's certain people that get what we're doing and really, really relate to it. Um, and then there's other people, and there happens to be a whole lot more of the other people, which is
sure.
also totally fine. I didn't set out to do this to be huge. I have a day job, I'm doing okay, but I just want to make music that I like and kind of pay homage to the bands I enjoy and grew up listening to and am influenced by. And if that's what we achieve and the music's good, I'm cool with that.
Well, I'll be honest. I think the music's great, so I think you're already achieving it. But as far as the writing process and the song structures and things of that nature, do you guys kind of collaborate it, or are you, since you're the front man and it's kind of your thing, do you do most of the writing, or?
This one was a little more collaborative. Generally, what would happen is I'd write on my own. I'd kind of put together like a demo of the song. I play a little bass. I can program a drum machine or whatever, and I kind of present ideas that way. And the band would rearrange it and pick it apart to a certain extent. Um, the drummers we've had have usually written their own parts. Ryan, our guitar player, usually writes his own leads and his own bits. And that's typically how it's gone. This album was a bit more collaborative in that sense. Ryan actually brought in some key riffs that turn out really cool. The opening riff on the song Descent actually is his, that first heavy riff in there.
Yeah,
So and what a cool way to open a record, props to him.
yeah,
He had some really good arrangement ideas in some of the other songs. And Brandon, once we linked up with him, we went pretty deep in rehearsals. We rehearsed for this a lot more than the last couple records. So we got a little more analytical with parts and kind of picking things apart, trying to figure out the best way to execute these songs. So I'm still the main guy writing most of this stuff, I would say, but this one was more of a band effort for sure. There was more actual jamming and rehearsals and a little more input from the other guys. So that was really cool.
I feel out of like listening. I didn't listen to your first album. I think it was in 2017.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of it, but that was the only album in your discography I haven't listened to yet. And as far as the Promised Land versus the other albums in your discography, it seemed to me that this album felt more like fun and free, especially like in the leads. Like it just seemed like you guys were having just a damn good time recording this, and like it translated into the music. Like the leads just flowed right into the music. They were loose, they were airy. It wasn't just so rigid, strong song structures. And I just, it was a huge step up from your last release. But your last release wasn't a pushover either. I mean, that was a solid album too.
I like that one.
What, your last year or the 2021 album?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it was
know, I like all of
great.
them.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're all good. But I always like to see how the progression of the songwriting and like how it goes. And while they're all great albums, it just seemed like you just stepped up so much as your songwriting got better, your playing, I assuming, got better. Not that it was bad in the first place, but it's just great, like a great album. And I feel like I'm kissing your ass, but like it really is a solid album.
Keep going.
Yeah, like take any compliment you can get. But I mean, man, I'm not just hyping it up. It really was. I've even been telling my friends because my neighbor, he listened. We went and saw I was trying to describe the album to him. We went and saw Queensryche, I think it was last year or the year before. And I said, man, if you listen to this album, it was the entire concert. The concert opened up with Trauma, which is a Bay Area thrash band.
I know
And then
Trauma.
following Trauma was Marty Friedman. And then after Marty Friedman was Queensryche. So you kind of had the prog, the thrash, you had like the superior songwriting and not your chorus verse chorus or verse chorus verse. So it was just a great listen, and that's the only thing I can say to compare it. What led you to choose Tom and Matt for the two collaboration parts?
So at a certain point, as I'm sure you noticed on Friday, the record has a lot of guitar solos on it.
It's great.
Like like it was a bit of us it was a bit too much for Ryan and I to handle on our own at a certain point. I mean, he did his things. I actually played a bit more lead on this one than I usually do. I'm usually just the rhythm guy, but
Okay.
um, we thought it'd be cool to bring in some other folks and kind of give it a different flavor. I know Matt from jamming with Professor Black from High Spirits and Dawnbringer, if you're familiar with either of those bands.
Okay.
Um, awesome Chicago bands that he's in here. But I knew Matt from that project. He's just on a physical level the best guitar player whose phone number I have. So I was like, yeah, I'll hit up Matt. And
Yeah.
then coincidentally, I saw Tom. Tom's been a supporter of ours. I don't even know how he found us, but he's been a supporter of ours since the last album. However, he found out about it. So I got in touch with him on Instagram. I guess he was between tours. He was looking for something to do, and I was like, "You want to throw a solo on this song real quick? It's perfect for you." And he next morning emailed me back with a solo, and that's what you hear on the record. It was fantastic.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and what Matt did is incredible too. You know, it's compositional. It's not even a solo. It's like a little song in itself in its own little nutshell. It's very like Andy LaRock from King Diamond or
Oh
that
yeah.
sort of thing where it's a little composition. I love that. So I think both those guys really raised the bar on those two songs and they did stuff that we would not have come up with on our own. And that's what keeps it interesting.
Yeah, and I thought like Chasing Eternity definitely had that heavier, grittier feel. But I thought, like you said, the what's it, Dread Tomorrow, I think is the song Matt's on.
Yeah.
And man, like I don't know if that's what you mean by composition. I'm not really a songwriter and I'm relatively new at learning guitar. Like I don't even play music, I just make sounds. But it seemed to me that like his solo didn't it wasn't like a punchy solo that just explodes out of the mix. It just was like a puzzle piece that fit right into the song. And like you said, almost a mini song in and of itself, which lends like your whole album to be a dynamic listen. If you're just looking for straight up prog or straight up thrash, it's not. And that I think, like you said, these choices you made and like surrounding yourself with these guys was just as successful as the songs you wrote.
I mean, it's always a group effort. You know, having Brandon on drums made a huge difference in the band. Having Noam Wallenberg mix the record, we've never worked with him before. Having him do the mix made a tremendous difference. I mean, it sounds so different from the last two records, and I think it's just a totally different listening experience that highlights these particular songs. You know, and having Tom and Matt in there too, it just makes it a more collaborative thing, and that leads to more interesting results, I think. You know,
Yeah,
you get people in there who are good and you just let them do what they do.
it's nice that you're patient enough to do that and not a control freak either, you know?
I'm totally a control freak, and I was nervous about it too. Every time we bring in anything, I was like, I want it to be right. I want it to be good.
Oh, of course.
But that's why you call the two best guitar players you know.
Sure.
Tom's not going to show up with something that sucks. Matt's not going to show up with something that sucks. I was very excited to see what they'd come up with, and I think they both absolutely crushed it.
Now, with a pile of guitars behind you, is there anything like a sort of a sort of piece of equipment or a certain guitar that you record with? Do you use different guitars, or is
So
there
it's
something that you
mostly
have to have?
there's no have to. I mean, I'm kind of an asshole about gear. Like to me they're just tools. You know, I've used different guitars. I have a main like Black Sights guitar now, but that was I had to have it built for me. So that was only used on the last record and the new one. Before that, I was just using random stuff, you know, Gibsons, or I had a guitar from some Indonesian company for a while. It's different amps on every record. It's different everything, you know. I'm always I think all the records sound good, but I'm never satisfied. I'm always trying to find different ways to get the sound that I'm hearing in my head. And, you know, different gear helps me achieve that. So I'm always, oh, I'm gonna sell these two guitars and buy this, you know, piece of rack gear or whatever.
Sure.
It's for me, it's more about the recording equipment and obviously my playing ability than the guitar stuff now. Um, I've realized I kind of sound the same through everything. Like I always play the same, it sounds the same regardless of what gear I'm using. So it's more important that I'm comfortable doing it and that I have, you know, more control over the process. We did all the guitar stuff here at my home studio this time instead of doing it on the clock in a real studio. And there's pros and cons to that, but it was cool to have that kind of time to be like, you know, I'll listen to something the next day and it's like, oh, it needs a little more mid-range or whatever, and then go do it again. And I think the guitar tone on this record is probably the best we've had
Yeah, I'll
far.
agree there.
Um, Sorry, really long answer to your question, but no, I know that's a boring answer, but I'm not partial to any gear. I have a guitar that's tuned specially for this band. The other guitars you see are kind of for other projects.
Oh, okay.
There's I have an acoustic guitar that I use for the acoustic bits on the record. I have a microphone, just a regular, you know, Shure microphone. I'm not using any special gear whatsoever, I don't think.
Now, with having a studio in your house, do you ever find it as like I was thinking about this yesterday with something you create, whether it's, music or a video and it's yourself and you're so like in focus with it. Do you ever find it having a studio at your house, it's almost impossible to just say, yep, I'm finished? Or do you always feel like I can tweak this? Just let me get these three more notes the way they want, or
I've gotten pretty good at time management and just kind of feeling when stuff is done. I'm pretty clear on my own abilities these days and knowing like, yeah, you can't really do it any better than that. You might as well just, you know, hit the button or whatever.
yeah,
Um, you know, I come from a mindset of, you know, I grew up listening to classic rock, you know, stuff my parents would hear in the car. And those bands, you look at a band like Creedence Clearwater Revival, they put out three albums in 1968. You know,
wow,
bands would crank albums out every 5, 6 months back then. And
yeah.
every song on them was good too. Like cranking out three good albums in a year, no one does that now.
I don't
So
think most bands could even put three albums out in a year.
no, of any quality.
Right.
So my mindset, like I'm not in a hurry, but my mindset is it shouldn't take that long to crank out 45 minutes of music, you know? We got held up a little bit by COVID on the last record, and that's why there was that kind of a longer gap there. Uh, Lineup changes have held us up a bit, but generally I write songs quickly. I tend to record them pretty quickly. Um, and it's pretty easy for me to say, you know, yes, let's call this done and go have it mixed and get out of here and move on with our lives. I'm very conscious of not, you know, beating things into the ground until they're not fun anymore.
Sure.
That's something I'm always conscious of.
Now, I ask every artist this. So, do you prefer, being that you're roughly about the same, age as me, do you prefer the old school way of full album releases, or do you? I understand now with algorithms and the singles being released one at a time. Um, I'm I'm to the point where like I like that whole slab of art. I want to see how songs are bookended or singles are bookended and how the album flows. So this single one being released every month for 3 months like absolutely drives me up as a wall. Too impatient. I want all the music now. But I understand too, like for the band's relevancy and like, keeping you in the spotlight and the algorithm more, it's better for you guys too. And I just always like to see the artist's opinion on, how their art is released.
I mean, I think it depends on what your art is. Like for the Promised Land for this record, I think it makes much more sense to hear it as a whole. You
Yeah,
know, I think every song flows into one another and it kind of works better as a cohesive piece. If you take just one song out of there, I don't think any one song in there is like representative of the full scope of what we do. So having a song like Gideon come out a month before the record and people just get that impression of us, it's like shit, that's that I see what you're saying because that frustrates me too.
yeah,
Um, but like you said, it's for the algorithm, it's just how social media works now and how releases work now. So I view it kind of as a necessary evil. The thing that's cool is I know a lot of the people listening to the band will listen to the whole thing. I don't think Black Sides fans are very singles minded. I don't think that makes sense for us.
yeah.
They will go check out the whole thing and they'll eventually hear the full record and get that experience. So if there's a lead track or two or three to kind of draw them in, that's cool too. And the singles thing, like I've noticed bands now doing short EPs or maybe even just only doing singles. Like they'll put out a song a month for 10 months till it's a full record and then they'll decide if they're going to do it as a full record because it keeps you back in the algorithm every month like you said.
Sure.
So I mean maybe next time around we could do that depending on if the material works with that. But I'm not partial to either way. I think it just depends on what works for what you're trying to do. Um, like you said, I'm old school. I prefer just buying a record and, sitting with headphones and listening to the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I also recognize that's not how most people are experiencing music right now.
Yeah.
So
And I wonder like I wonder if it changes the entire like songwriting approach because a band like you said, Gideon coming out and you just get that one. I can't tell you how many CDs you hear that one song on the radio or MTV or wherever. Well, I guess MTV doesn't even play music now. But wherever you hear that one song and then you go out, you buy the record, you buy the CD, and next thing you know, you're like, what the hell is this? This one's heavy as hell, and the entire album's acoustic, and you're like, what the hell? Whereas your album, it's almost like each song is so much stronger because it's so diverse from the previous or it just contrasts each other so well. So I wonder like when you do start writing for like, hey, this single is going to be released this month, it might change like the cohesiveness of the EP or the album. I don't know.
yeah, I mean it depends. I think with us, especially this time around, each song was kind of self-contained. But like you said, they're so diverse. We have this one thrash song, we have one slower kind of gothy song, we have a 12-minute sort of prog song.
Yeah.
And none of those things are exactly what we do. We're not a thrash band. We're certainly not a gothic band. But at the same time, if we were to take one song and just throw everything in there, like every song has every genre in it now, like that doesn't work either. And it's forced because then you're trying to shove all that information in a smaller amount of time.
Yeah.
So I I think the way we did it seems to have worked. Um, we wouldn't have done it differently anyway because we're stubborn. But yeah, I mean, next time maybe there'll be a different, better way to get this out to people. I mean, who knows?
So with the title The Promised Land with a question mark, what promised land were you referring to? Because I know in Chicago can be a rougher city. I work with a guy from Chicago, and I think the lower South Side district is a little rougher than the rest, and it could be a war zone there. Or with songs like Gideon, you're like, is it the Middle East or is it the promised land of America? I mean, there's so many influences you could draw just from that one title.
So I got nervous because when we were recording this, the day I finished singing that song, the song Promised Land, was October 7th last year, the same day that the attack started in Israel.
Oh man,
And I finished recording, I hit stop, and I was like, oh, I'll take a break and check the news. Oh shit. And it crossed my mind, like if you ever wanted to change the lyrics to avoid people maybe misinterpreting, now would be the time. And I didn't, I kept it the same. But I mean, it could be, I write a lot about religion that comes up in the songs a lot. I'm a non-believer, but I grew up in a religious household. I see things that that my family and, people in my neighborhood, people around me do now that that I find extremely problematic or at least questionable. And, that comes out in the songs, whether it's something more personal or something more global. And my thought with the Promised Land is, there's been so many conflicts and wars of all kinds just based on belief systems like that, dogma like that. And I don't think any of it's justified.
I
There's
myself
no,
was go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I was just saying I think in cases like that, I tend to think both sides are wrong. I can't take sides if that's the basis. Nobody wins if it's like that. So that was kind of my take there. And just for the record, the song Gideon, not religious in nature at all. I only picked that word because it fit the number of syllables I needed, and it's not cool.
But
No act,
it's
no
so
meaning there whatsoever.
but it's so odd that like you said, you recorded this and then you're like, oh shit, look what happened. And when as a listener, like you never really truly know what, even when they spell it out completely, you never really truly know what the songwriter's thinking. So then I started thinking, like, Promised Land, is he talking about retirement? Is he talking about like
Not that old.
no, well, that's what I'm thinking, because that's all I'm thinking is like, man, I got to get out of my day job. I need retirement. So that's the Promised Land for me. So you start thinking like it could be a metaphor for something else. It could be, the Gaza. By the time you write something, record it, demo it, record it, release it, as a listener, you kind of only think of what's going on when it's released. But, I lose track of the feeling like this song might have been written 5 years ago, 8 years ago, and it's a leftover from X. So it's odd how sometimes, modern life is stranger than fiction.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, every time we put something out, really every time anyone puts something out, you're hearing songs that were probably written at least a year before that. So that's why I'm not writing really blatantly about current events, because by the time it's out, they're not current anymore. Music's supposed to be timeless. Look at all the albums. I mean, you mentioned punk rock. Look at all the punk records that came out when George W. Bush was president.
Yeah.
All the protest records about the Iraq war. That hasn't held up well. The music's still cool, but you listen to the lyrics and it's, they're talking about stuff from 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to keep stuff timeless and just vague enough that people can kind of add their own meaning to it. I've had people write me about the lyrics and they're like, "Oh, that's so cool that you wrote a song about such and such." And it's so far off from what I was actually thinking at the time, but I'm not going to correct them. It's like, cool, if that's what you took from it, that's awesome.
Sure. And like, I was raised on like punk rock, but I look back at some of the songs, like Propaganda had a song about the Gaza and the Middle East. And I don't even remember I'm getting old, but I don't remember how many years ago that came out, maybe 30, 35. And you look at it and you're like, oh man, the Gaza Strip, like, look at it now. Like, I think they said something about turning it into a parking lot. And I was like, well, it's kind of what's happening now. And it still holds up.
Certain subjects, unfortunately, are timeless. And yeah, I think the Middle East thing is one of them. You could listen to any song written about conflict in the Middle East. First song comes to mind, Stormtroopers of Death, Fuck the Middle East.
Yeah. Yeah.
The names and places might be a little different now, but I mean, that still sort of applies. They had a point. But, there's certain subjects are timeless, and unfortunately, that seems to be one of them, but that's not literally what we were writing about.
Sure. And, I just wanted to make that because like I said, as a listener, you never know, but I always want to know. So are you guys going to tour to support this?
I do not think we will tour. There may be some shows. We've never really been a big live band, and that kind of has to do with everyone having just a lot going on.
Sure.
We're older dudes, we have some of us have families and jobs and stuff. So there will be some shows. We've never Black Sites has never toured. I think grand total we've played live maybe 6 times ever. We're not a big live band. So I can't say for sure what's going to happen, but I can say with almost absolute certainty that there will not be a large tour in the sense that you're talking about.
Sure, but I would love to catch a show. So if I'm ever in the Chicago area, I'm going to be looking out for you guys.
Absolutely, man. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I got my wife has family there, so hopefully we'll get out there in the next couple years and maybe I meet you up for a slice of pizza or something.
Absolutely, man. You know where to find us.
Yeah, for sure. Well, hey, we're running out of time. I wanted to I wanted to thank you today for a phenomenal album first and foremost, and secondly for taking the time to meet with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, man. I'm seriously, thank you for having me on, and I'm really glad you got to check out the record and that you enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I had so much fun today that maybe we should do this again sometime. And if you have any shows or news or anything you need me to help you out with, let me know, man, and I'll be more than happy to help you out anytime.
I appreciate that, man. Absolutely. Yeah, next time we have anything noteworthy going on, I'll hit you up or I'll have Curtis hit you up.
Yeah, for sure, man. If there's anything I can do for you guys, feel free, reach out.
Fantastic, man. That's very cool of you. Thank you.
Yeah, dude. Hey, thanks a lot, Mark. I really appreciate your time. I really want to wish you guys the best of luck moving forward. I hope you guys hit it big because, damn, everybody needs to hear this album. It's fucking good.
I would like that. I agree completely, man.
Yeah.
And seriously, thank you for helping us get the word out. You know, every bit counts. So
Yeah, for sure, man. I'll put
I
some
hope
stuff
tens of
together.
thousands of people see this interview.
Yeah, dude. And I'll put some stuff together, hopefully. And, hopefully we can work together in the future.
Absolutely, man.